What's up, guys? This is Pat, and before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder to please hit that subscribe button and leave us a rating and review. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn at The Founder Hour. All right, here we go. Welcome to the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Pat.
And I'm Posh.
And we're hanging out today with Yancey Strickler. He's the co-founder of Kickstarter. He's an author, a writer, I think formerly a journalist. Is that right?
Sure.
In the music scene. So excited to learn about your story and chat with you and talk about sort of what you've done up until this point and what's to come next. So thanks for being on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So kind of to take it all the way back, tell us a little bit about sort of the early days, where you grew up, what sort of things were you into, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in Southwest Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, which is part of the Appalachian Mountains. My parents split when I was 3. My dad was a traveling waterbed salesman and musician. My mom was a secretary. And when I was about 6 or so, my mom remarried and we moved out to a farm, and I grew up in the country. So I grew up on a cattle farm. We just rented the house there, and I didn't really have any neighbors, and so I just read books all the time, and we didn't really have much in the way of TV either. So yeah, I was just always reading books, and my dream was always to be a writer, and that was sort of where I disappeared to and what I aspired to.
What kind of books were you reading?
I think the Hardy Boys, Matilda. Matilda was my favorite book for a long time. Harriet the Spy, and then I started getting into reading some of my dad's books. Like I read Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test while I was in high school, and started Soldier in the Rain. I remember reading Slaughterhouse-Five. So I got into those things too. But maybe the biggest life-changing read was maybe All the President's Men. That was probably my favorite book, starting from about the age of 12 or 13, about Watergate, and that made me interested in journalism, and that just seemed exciting, both exciting and like something I could possibly do. Indiana Jones was also exciting, but I wasn't gonna crack a whip and save the idol, the golden idol. But
Right.
Asking people questions, figuring things out, that seemed plausible.
Is there any specific type of writing you wanted to do when you grew up? Like, did you envision yourself as that kind of writer?
I don't even know. I don't know that I had any specific goal. I mean, I think I did a lot of things. I would write poetry. I wrote short stories. I wrote, just as a kid, you're just having fun. Yeah. It was just knowing that it was just feeling that's what I was good at. And reading was certainly always my favorite thing. So it's just like, I don't know, it's just doing what was obvious.
Was there anyone, I guess, growing up, was it like that told you that you were good at writing, or was it something that you just felt yourself? Like, was it like some sort of external validation?
I just enjoyed. It was just what I would do what I would do on my own. Sure, I would play Legos or whatever, but also I would just write stories. That was fun. That was interesting. And also we had, my mom as a secretary, we had a Macintosh 2, an Apple II in our house starting in the mid 80s, because she would have to do work for the professor she worked for. And so then we had a computer in our house from very early on. And my mom taught me how to use that, and so that was another. It was also a thing that I would do on the computer too, even at a pretty early age.
Going into high school, what kind of kid were you like?
I think pretty nerdy, pretty awkward. I went to a Christian school through 5th grade, and then 6th grade started going to public school, and in a new area where we moved.
That was kind of like me. I did the same
rural
thing. 6th to 7th, yeah.
Still in Virginia.
Yeah, still in Virginia. And so that was just a big culture change. And so that, that school was hard. School was hard for me from 6th grade on, I would say. Just I was into music and I was into books, but I wasn't the most, I wasn't socially terrible, but I wasn't the most socially adjusted person. And I just remember, even at the start of a school year, like we would pick out new clothes, and I would try to get the most normal seeming clothes possible, but still, like, people could tell I wasn't like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a real struggle. I'd have few good friends, friends with a lot of girls, and then like had a small group of other friends, and then things sort of changed for me. My junior year of high school, I got into like a magnet school program where this thing called the Governor's School picked 2 to 4 kids from each school in the state. So I got to go to that for half a day, and there I met people that I really connected with for the first time since I was like, in elementary school. And those are still, my best friendships to this day. And those are people coming similarly from more rural communities. And this one friend in particular, his parents were artists who'd moved out to the country in the 70s, but they were from New York and from Europe. And so that going to his house and seeing what else life could be, being in a place where you ate dinner at 8:00 and you drank wine, and those and they got the New Yorker, like those things were so, like, I'd never seen anything like that before. And so that was like just sort of showed what else was out there in the world. And for me, as someone who was naturally curious and always liked to learn, like, all that was awesome. It was all very exciting.
Were like English classes like your best classes, or did you?
Yeah, I was good at that. I mean, I high school was easy.
Yeah.
Some things I didn't. I mean, I did pretty well at everything. But sure, yeah. I mean, reading was. I mean, it'd be like classes we would read in English would be classes would be books. The books we would read in English class would have been things I'd read.
Yeah.
A year or two before.
Right.
But that was just because that's what I liked to do.
Mm.
You mentioned music. How did that come about? How did you fall into music?
My dad is a musician. My mom also loves music, but my dad sort of forced the guitar on me from a young age. And probably when I was 6 or 7, I started really taking lessons. And maybe by the time I was about 15, I liked it.
Mm-hmm. Was it like classical guitar? Or?
No, just starting with the basics. And then when it clicked for me was like age 12 when my dad taught me how to play Blackbird, the Beatles song, on guitar. Yeah. So that was rewarding and fun and a song I liked. And, so that made it more interesting. But yeah, I mean, I was always, my dad always had bands. The bands would practice in our tiny house, like while I would sleep in the room next door. Like I was just around it all the time, like always bands playing just around me as a kid. And then my dad just had this gigantic record collection because he worked in a record store for years and in the 60s. And so just a regular thing for him to make me sit on the couch and then play me songs. And like you'd have to sit there for 2 hours while he would play you. He would just say, just one more. He would always say, just one more. And then, you knew it was just, you were trapped. Yeah. And then later when I started liking those songs, it was annoying. But so a lot of it was just the house I grew up in. And then I had a deep connection, deep affinity. I listened to the radio. I knew, when I was age 7, I started a Beach Boys fan club that I tried to get like my cousins and friends to join with me. And, just cause I really liked them at that time. So it's just always something I connected with. And then as I became like a teenager, music became even more of an identity. And so I was, 12 years old in 1991. And, so that's like when Nirvana's just happening. And I really, that remade me, You
sort of identified with...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with Kurt for sure. Never Pearl Jam, of course. But yeah, I mean, like, I'm very much a product of a Kurt Cobain kind of ethos, I think, in a lot of ways. And then also growing up in Virginia, the other big legacy we had there was Fugazi, and sort of like the DC punk hardcore scene was also very local. I saw Fugazi was like one of my first shows I saw as like a teenager, 13, 14, because they would play all ages shows.
And for those who may not really know, the story behind from Nirvana and like that kind of, movement, like what would you say like you identified with the most?
Well, I mean, it's just like it's really hard to overstate the degree to which there was just a massive culture shift where a certain predominant culture that had been musically was represented by hair metal and Guns N' Roses, things like that, and which for me represented like a lot of the bullies in my school. That got supplanted by this new sound of bands led by Nirvana, but also Jane's Addiction, Alice in Chains, a whole cluster of these groups, Soundgarden, that suddenly were just like breaking through and were very clearly surpassing this like previous cultural paradigm. And one of the things that distinguished these groups was their value systems. Kurt Cobain was like would talk about being a feminist, and they would cross dress, and they embraced all these things, and like that was like extremely, just extremely challenging at the time, and the music was great, and they felt young in a way that that I identified with, and yeah, it was exciting. It sort of expressed like we were on the map, and we just meaning like people who don't feel like they fit in. This is a moment, and so MTV was such the center of culture. So as those songs, it Smells Like Teen Spirit starts playing on MTV all the time, like it really just made it made a big difference in the larger culture.
It shows you how many like people in the world felt the same way, but there was like nothing that like really spoke to them until they sort of broke out on the scene, right?
Yeah, and then what it leads you into, because like Nirvana are like extraordinarily generous artists, where they from the beginning they used their fame to highlight all of their friends and their forebears who they wanted to give a shout out. Like when they played on MTV Unplugged, which is such a big thing to play on, like they brought out the Meat Puppets. They covered 3 Meat Puppets songs together. Like half the songs they did were covers, and a lot of those were unknown songs by unknown artists that were their friends. So like that was their thought process. How do we use this? We elevate other people.
Yeah.
And so the liner notes of Nirvana albums would just have like Kurt writing down all the bands he liked, and you're learning about Slant Six, and you're learning about these things that you never would have heard of, and he was just such a knowledgeable guy about music.
Did you ever get to see them?
And so then you just keep digging down.
Did you ever get to see them play live? Or
I never saw Nirvana play. I saw other bands that era, but I never saw Nirvana.
So you're clearly super passionate, at this point, obviously, and still about music. What happened when you went to college? Like you decided to go to college. What did you study, and what did you sort of envision that would become?
I ended up studying, got a double major in English and literary and cultural studies. Literary and cultural studies was basically like, cultural theory attaching philosophy and American studies and various history classes to do like, just critical readings on the world. So like I wrote it's not exactly a dissertation thesis, but you have to produce a final paper, and mine was about like the hegemonic properties of a popular culture, just like the way the popular culture would absorb any attempt to change it. College was fine. I don't know that I made the most of it.
Where did you go?
I went to school called William & Mary in Virginia. I made some great friends there who I still care about, but I again there felt like an outsider.
Why do you think that is? Why did you feel like an outsider?
Well, I mean, William & Mary is like, at the time, something like 80% Greek, like everyone's in frats and sororities.
Yeah.
So it just has that culture. And, and I went there hoping to be around something like, I was hoping for something like my governor's school experience. And it wasn't that. It wasn't that. I'd met some of those kinds of people there, but like, I experienced some of the same issues of getting bullied and harassed there as I did in high school.
Do you think that's like the general college education system, or do you think it was specific to William and Mary?
I think it's
because I feel like
it's a general education system in schools that have Greek societies.
Right, like sort of the larger institutions that have
William Mary's not even a big school, but they just allow it. But like if you go to I think if you go to a school that doesn't allow that, I don't think you have that culture so much.
Yeah. So you graduated with a double major.
Yeah.
What about like did you like think that you would be a writer, like talking, like it seems like you're really obsessed with like culture, like just sort of this whole cultural shifts and paradigms. Like what did you see that would become in your professional life? Like you would sort of be in that?
I don't know how clear an idea I had. I mean, I started writing for Pitchfork while I was still in college. So that was big. Like I was the music director of my college radio station, or no, I was one of the music directors at my college radio station. And I was like writing reviews for free for various zines. So I was already doing that. Yeah. And I was doing that because those are the places I read, and you learn about promo CDs, how if people write about music, they get promo CDs of music before other people hear it. And that was just like, couldn't even imagine what it would mean to get into that kind of jackpot of like hearing music before other people. So it was just like, I wanted that. And so I was doing it already, and I started writing for Pitchfork. I did a few reviews for them.
Was that hard to do? Like, was it hard to get those, or like?
No, it was just so early. I mean, this was like their first year in existence, and they just put up a post one day that said, "Hey, we're looking for more writers. Anyone like write in?" And so I wrote in, and Ryan, the founder, wrote back. Was like, "Sure, you're try a few."
When the founder writes back, it's
yeah. Well, I mean, Pitchfork then was like 3 or 4 people.
Yeah,
and and there was like a message boards that I was a part of that were a lot of other like people that have gone on to be important internet writers. Like were also there talking, just sort of like the early crew of people who, cared about culture, had access to technology, were the certain age, liked certain kinds of things. You just congregated, and that world was smaller. And so I ended up moving to New York. I mean, it wasn't a plan. It was like I graduated college. At the time, I was living in where I went to school in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I was the night manager of a Days Inn. I like worked, did tech support for the college, and I worked as a mover too. Like I had those 3 jobs while going to school, and it was awesome. By then I enjoyed it. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then my best friend from high school who I'd met at that governor's school called and just said, "Hey, me and a group of 4 guys got a house in Coney Island. Can you be here? And by the end of the week." This is on like a Tuesday or something. And like that week,
to help move.
Can you move here?
Okay.
Not to help move. Can you come move here yourself? But it was basically like, I think it was basically them being like, "Oh man, we have to make this deposit. We don't have enough money. Who can we get?"
Right. Yeah.
Wait, this can be a bedroom.
Yeah.
So I think I was that call.
Yeah.
And I ended up saying yes. It was so immediate. I ended up saying yes, and was in New York like within a week. And then I started looking for jobs, and I'd say about 3 months later, I got a job, and it was like through a classified in the New York Times, and it was for a radio news service where they would write news blurbs that DJs would read out on the air, and the job was to write those news blurbs. And so it was like a team of people that did that. So I got a job doing that, and so for 3 years I did that.
Wow!
And I'd have to write 12 stories a day of like 75 word sort of capsules of entertainment and like pop and modern rock news.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, it was awesome. Awesome. Yeah, great editor. Like you have to make it so tight and punchy. Part of your day is spent looking for what are stories someone might want to, that people might want to listen to, and then your editor tells you, okay, here are the ones you're going to write, and then you have to do a draft and like get it so tight, get the facts perfect. Oh, it's amazing! It's like such a great training to do that.
And what was your experience like in New York? Beyond just work, like living there with all these guys and being in this big city. I assume it was different than living in Virginia. What were some things that really, stood out to you in your time there?
Well, I mean, Coney Island was so far out. It was like an hour 10 for me to get to work.
You used to work in Manhattan?
Yeah, I would work in Midtown. And so for all of us, it was just so far out. In a way, it was like a good halfway house transition to New York. But I I was not happy my first few years there. I had no money. I didn't know where to go. It was intimidating. I've been to New York a few times, and I knew my way around a little bit. But yeah, it was hard. But honestly, you don't have enough money to leave because you don't have to go somewhere else. You have to have a car, and you're like, how would I ever get money to have a car? Spend all that on an apartment. And so you're just kind of forced to get better at it. And then I'd say within 2 years, I started to feel more confident, and then that's exciting. It's exciting to be good at something that is difficult. But yeah, I was just, going to see a lot of music, hanging out with other people my age, trying to, that's a great time. That's the Strokes are coming up then. And then after 2 years in Coney Island, some of us moved to the Lower East Side. I ended up living around the Lower East Side for the next 14, 15 years with a couple spots elsewhere around the city. And so, yeah, New York I ended up loving. It was very, New York was always very generous to me, and had a lot of, a lot of great experiences there. And, and just sort of being forced to, it just forces you to grow or leave, basically.
At this time, did you feel like you were becoming less of a misfit, as a young professional, than you were in, high school and college?
No, I think I still had that same story from myself, because I think the interesting thing that happened to me is I got laid off from that radio job, and then ended up getting a job inside first a company called Flavor Pill, then another company called eMusic, and they were sort of now I guess we would call them .coms or startups. At the time they weren't that. They're just small companies.
This is during the .com boom?
This is 2003, 2004.
Okay, so
2005.
Yeah.
And I got hired in those places in editorial roles, writer kind of roles. But then you're in meetings that are about product, that are about marketing, that are about strategy, that are about management. You're just in different contexts, and I ended up being really good at that stuff. And
at all the things you just mentioned.
I would have good ideas. I would have good instincts. People would listen to me, and I was surprised to be good at those kinds of things.
Why do you think that was? Was it just because you had just such a deep interest in it that you wanted to do well at it, or was it more than that?
I think it's just how my brain works. I just think my brain absorbs a lot, and I can make connections between things. And yeah, there's just I just look at things differently, and I can articulate myself pretty well. But as I was good at these things, and I kept being invited to do more, to be more part of those kinds of decisions and conversations, and that honestly made me feel conflicted, because I was, I'm a writer, I'm a creative person. I'm not a business guy, and I don't want to be a business person, and so it felt it just felt like things that I almost needed to give myself permission to do, or I would feel guilty about being good at, in a way. And I had to become accept the idea of, that was it was okay as a creative person to care about those things, and it didn't make me less of a creative person. But that, to me, those roles, those lines, I almost think about it as the Nirvana example from earlier, but these just this divide between roles or types of people or types of profession just felt very clear to me. And I don't know if that was truly more the case then, or if that was because I was younger, or if that's just my lens being imposed upon the world.
What did you imagine a business person to look like or be? Versus
I saw them. They're I knew exactly what they were like. I was surrounded by them all the time. And it's very clear who was who. Yeah. And it could tell by, just from your which coworkers were your friends and who were not. You knew who was a suit or a suit wannabe, and then who was cool.
Right.
Who cared about anything else.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting. And I think a lot of it has changed since then. And today, most of the creatives are the business people, right?
I don't know that that's true.
I think I guess that's why it matters how you define a business person, right? Like in this day and age, like an artist, a musician,
But that's
they're
very
not
different.
necessarily represented only by like a big like record label. Like they are their own business. Like they're a business person.
Sure, but I think that like they are, but their goals as a business person are so different. So I think it gives, because they express themselves in a form that like interacts with the market, and that they have learned that it's smarter and to your advantage to be educated about how to do that yourself rather than outsourcing it to someone else because you get screwed.
Right.
But like a business person is looking to enter the market, to extract from the market, and I just think that the motivations are very different. But like this was something with Kickstarter that we thought a lot about, because we're making a tool that allows people to fund early ideas, and from the our focus was on creative people, creative projects. We didn't want the site to be just about. We didn't want it to be for businesses. We wanted it to be for creative projects, for people making artworks,
Right.
And creative works. We wanted to have a very like broad view of what constituted a creative project. But that was a touchy thing to do, to introduce something that had money and funding so blatantly a part of it to the creative world as Kickstarter was. Like Kickstarter was something that sort of collapsed that wall in a way that between like the business side and the creative side in a way that was, I think, welcome but also uncomfortable. So I felt that tension again there, where I felt like Kickstarter was collapsing those two things and bringing them together.
Why did you have this internal conflict of creative versus business? I mean, in your mind, why were they these mutually exclusive things?
Well, because I still think they are. I mean, because I think that, if you think about the creative industries, there are people who make artwork and creative work, and then there are people who like build a highway to sell that creative artwork.
Right.
And those are just very different people. And with very different sets of values. If a movie studio or if a movie studio was truly run by artists, it would function very, very differently. If a newspaper was run by journalists, it would function very, very differently. Like these are very different just value systems and beliefs. And so for me, it's like I know what kind of value system I have. And so I feel like and we saw it in Kickstarter. For us, like we became a PBC, a public benefit corporation, to like legally delineate what our values were, and in contrast to the rest of the world that we're a part of, which says that you are legally expected to maximize shareholder value. You're legally expected to just make every decision a financial one. And that belief is so pervasive that like people went to the trouble of creating a different legal category to allow people to separate themselves.
What led to, Kickstarter? I know you said that you had all these kind of different jobs in New York. Talk to us about, what led up to the early days of Kickstarter.
Well, Kickstarter started with Perry Chen in 2001 or 2002.
And you knew him back then?
No, I didn't know him at this point. 2001, 2002, he'd wanted to throw a concert in New Orleans where he was living, and it was going to have to front like $20,000 to make it happen. And during that moment, he had this idea of what if instead I could propose the idea for the concert online, and people put up their credit cards to buy tickets, but no one gets charged unless the show sells out. Like that way, I'm not stuck making this decision. Everyone can make it together. But the show didn't end up happening, and he didn't make that website because like in 2001, 2002, that's a very different internet.
Right.
That's the crash, but that's also like to have a website, you have to have a closet full of servers. Like it's just a very, very different world. So he spent some time thinking about the idea more. And then we met in 2005 in New York. He had moved back because he thought, I need to try to make this happen. And then we happened to meet because I was a regular at a place where he was waiting tables at the time. And we got to be friends. And
Like you literally like went to the restaurant and he was like your waiter?
yeah, he just worked there. Yeah. And so we would I would go there often. So we would just talk because we both like basketball and we just, we're friendly with each other.
Knicks fan?
No, Rockets fans. And so we ended up, becoming friends. And then he shared with me, told me about this idea he had. And that, and he was, he had like had me sign an NDA. Like he was well prepared. But so we started talking about it and talking about this idea for what would become Kickstarter, but the idea for crowdfunding.
Why do you think like he wanted to tell you about the idea? Just because you guys were friends, or was there more to it than that?
My day job was at a tech company. I, like knew artists and creative people. I at the time had a record label that I was running on the side too. Like, I don't know. We just got along, just, similar outlook.
What was he doing at the time?
He was, at that time he was waiting tables part-time. He was working on this idea. He was making art, previously he had been a recording engineer, and then way back he'd been a day trader for a little bit. He'd sort of bounced around
not
a
lot
of different
experience.
things. No, we were not business people at all. This
Seems
was
like
just
you guys
like
were both like going back to the creative versus business. Like you guys were both creatives.
Yeah, definitely. And when we found our third, we found Charles Adler a year later. Charles was a designer, but he was also creative.
Another creative.
Also not a business person. And so, also not technical people.
Yeah.
But
And you literally started a technical business.
yeah. So there was a lot of challenge for that for a while, like hiring contract developers and sort of not knowing what we were doing and kind of getting burned and there was from the time that I got involved, it was like 3.5, almost 4 years later that the site launched. Maybe 2.5 years after Charles launched. It was a long road, and really like it was Perry and Charles that pushed so much during a couple of those periods in the years before we launched, where there were moments where it just seemed like it could die. Like there's a moment where the idea just could die because it'd been so hard to get it there. And then just like the site kept not getting built, and there just kept being obstacles.
Right. It's interesting because like we going back to our conversation about like creatives versus business people and how creatives sort of can just do it and put it out there and not have to like, and the business people are sort of just trying to find those like creatives to push out there for other reasons. But for you guys, like you guys were these three creatives launching a business, like a technical business. So it was kind of like the roles were flipped in a way where, right, like you guys can't create it yourselves necessarily. You have to like hire out people and depend on other people. And now it takes longer than if you were.
I mean, artists have to depend on other people too, right? I mean, you need like teams, you need production, you need, and everyone, you need your crew of people that you know how to trust. Our issue was that we're trying to do something in a world where we don't know who we can trust. So we don't have that crew. Like anytime you do something and you're like, before you know how to know who's good or not, right? You're just guessing. If you do well your first time, you just got lucky. You just got lucky. So I think it's just like that. And we would talk to potential investors, and we talked to a lot of artists, and artists almost always got it, and thought, yeah, the idea, because our pitch to them was, listen, if you're trying to make a new album, a new, movie, whatever it is, you're pitching someone who's looking for a hit. Like they're looking to put money into something that will make them money. But most of your ideas are just, they have no desire to make money. They just want to exist. Like you're just trying to make the idea in your head real and like be able to do that. And that's the goal of an artist. Yeah. And so, we're building a place where people will put up money to fund those projects, but there will be no financial upside. Like if someone puts up money, they get a copy of it when you're done, or their name is in it if you want to let them do that. But there's no financial upside, so there's no need to make hits. you can just pitch the vision of what you want to do. And, for every artist, like that's amazing. For a lot of the more traditional investors or more business-minded people, their answer would be, why? Like, I got to get a piece. Like, I got to get a piece of what I put money into, and otherwise this makes no sense. No one's going to do this. But our belief was that the relationship between artists and fans is so strong, and also that there are a million valid reasons to do something other than financial upside. And the idea that we have locked ourselves into a reality, a creative reality, where unless you have a rich uncle or you yourself are wealthy, like your only choice is to try to make something that will make someone else money, just so obviously wrong.
Right.
And so for us, the story of what we were doing was to try to create a separate economy inside the larger one where money would change hands for, you could say they're altruistic reasons, but it's just like for all the other reasons why cool things should happen.
And was this something that I know you mentioned Perry was like deeply passionate about and working on? Was it the same for you, or was it something that you sort of developed as you worked on it more in those early days?
Well, I mean, I had the deep emotional connection to the struggle of being an artist, trying to work with integrity, and just like writing about those people, just wanting to be someone like that.
So you saw like the possibilities of what this could create for them.
I just knew the problem, and I was very aware. Like, I worked in a company that was involved in digital music in 2005, so that's like when the music industry is sort of crashing and changing over, and the whole debate is about how to monetize music, and all I could think about is like everyone's acting like music is this like plentiful natural resource. Like, why is anyone questioning like, well, where does this music come from in the first place? Like, what do those people need? Like, everyone's just looking to how do we sell the stuff that's already been made, but no one's talking about, well, how does this stuff get made in the first place? I was just so struck with like everyone's focusing here. For everyone I know, like everyone's focusing at the end of the pipe. Everyone I know is like looking way earlier in the process. Like, that's the hard part. And so there's just a mismatch of like, again, just seeing art as a good, as a plentiful, bountiful good, and that, just not thinking about how it got made, and especially not thinking about how it got made if it wasn't likely to make more than like, $100 million at the box office or whatever that equivalent is in each industry.
You said it took about, I guess from the time you got involved, 3.5 years to launch. When Kickstarter finally launched, what did it look like?
I mean, not at all dissimilar from what it does today, to be honest. For the first day, there were, I think, 2 projects. First one was by Perry. Second one was by me, Perry, and a friend of ours, Claudia. It was very, just very simple, but not that far from what it is today. When we launched, we've been telling our friends about the site for years. The site that like they probably all gave up on ever actually happening. But we made it so that you could only start a project if you had a special invite to start one, and you could have an invite by being invited by one of us. And if you got an invite, you could invite 5 other people. And so there's like a
tight-knit community.
Yeah, sort of a scarcity from the beginning. And that was really helpful because it made it like people were asking each other to get in. And it meant that like, 4 days after the site went live April 28th, 2009, and 4 days later, the first project was funded, and it was a project called Drawing for Dollars. And it was someone saying, if you give me $5, I'll draw you a picture of something. And he got $35 from 3 people. But that was like, the system worked. We didn't know anyone involved. Like, it was a real validating moment.
Right.
What were you doing like to spread the word? Like you launched, you spent all these, and by the way, throughout those like 3.5 years, were you working on this every day, or was it sort of just like a side project?
Perry every day, Charles every day, me more nights and weekends.
So you were working full time.
I still had a day job that I loved. So I was more doing nights and weekends, but it was always meeting with creator friends and talking to them about it. when the site was live, what did we do to tell people?
So you were sort of planting the seeds before it launched,
Yeah, I mean, for
telling people like,
years
hey,
we
like
had
this is what,
been. Yeah, for years we'd had been.
And you guys didn't raise any money, did you?
Yeah, we did. We raised friends and family money up until that point. I mean, I think that there was I don't remember what the first press was. It was a couple weeks in maybe, but it was all just like through like the internet community and just people telling people. I mean, it was a very organic kind of growth. I mean, I remember the first time like a modern dance project launched on the site, and like a week later there were 10 of them. And I just realized, oh, okay, so this is like a community.
It's like a network effect.
Yeah, someone in a community launches the project. People in that community suddenly see, oh, there's this new option. And of course, the second someone would start a Kickstarter, they would email all the most important people in their life, trying to send the best email ever, saying, come support me on this. Here's this amazing way that I can be helped now. And so in every way, we're just like
it had like a built-in growth mechanism.
Yeah, and just really bringing real value,
right?
And validation, and so just like it just being such a positive thing to share, but like that, you have to make sure that's the case. Like this is why the site was invite only, and why the site was focused on just creative projects and not allowing charity. Because if the site had people raising money for cancer bills, or people, sort of using a really sad story to motivate people to help, the culture of that would be very different. And especially as a creative person, you wouldn't feel so proud of it.
Right.
So even though we knew that like the crowdfunding market would end up could be anything, we always saw focusing just on creative communities being what we personally cared about, but B, like the only way that works is if it's only a space for that.
And was that space, the crowdfunding space, a thing back then?
No.
So you guys sort of pioneered that.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't new. So you had to deal with all the legalities that came with it.
Yeah. I mean, there had been, there had been a few other, like Cellaband had been like the Swedish site that had let you buy shares in a band in like 2004. There had been the artist Jill Sobule had done her own kind of page. Marillion, another band, had done it. Indiegogo had been around like maybe 8 months before Kickstarter launch. They were like just film and kind of a slightly different take on it. But there was no, Kiva was probably the best example. Like then it was called microfinance is how people would talk about it. But no, so there was nothing. And then Kickstarter launched, and just the language of the site, the deadline, the goal, the reward structure, the ticking clock, all that just quickly became a form. And, within a year, there were probably 30 or 40 sites out there that looked exactly like Kickstarter.
Right, because then I feel like the reason I asked is it's one of those things where, you have to have this like crazy vision of what it's going to look like, because it doesn't exist. You can't model it after something else. So you have nothing to go off of. So you're sort of just envisioning it and then, I guess, like programming it together. So you're three of you guys, all creatives. How did you guys go about figuring that user interface, and then also like actually building it out that it would function like a real website?
Yeah, I mean, hours and hours of debating and whiteboarding, and really like you dream everything that could be in this product, and then you have to hone in on what has to be in this product. And we always had this mindset of like, you can only expect people to learn one new thing at a time. So like, let's try to make this as simple as possible, as familiar as possible. Try to make things as self-evident. Try to, the less explainer text, the better. Like the numbers on a Kickstarter page of the money, the time, the backers are like that might be one of the largest fonts on the internet that people use regularly, but like just trying to how do you simply communicate the story? And so a lot of it was just, simplicity. Like this is a whole new model. There's this conditional funding, the idea that it's not a purchase. Like there's a lot that you have to bake into this. And so it's like, trying to create a distinct and simple experience. But we'd also have to do things like you also want to distinguish between this and like an e-commerce experience, because you don't want people to think that they're just buying something.
Right, like their card's going to be charged right away. And I mean, like, again, that's something that I don't think necessarily existed before.
No,
especially not in like the microfinancing world. But it's like a huge customer behavior, user behavior that you have to like a hump that you have to get over and like get them to subscribe to that type of.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the first 2 years at least, like every Kickstarter video is the creator explaining how Kickstarter works.
Right, like you're not going to be charged. Put your credit card. We promise you we're not going to charge you.
And then there's a point where that stops happening. Yeah. And then you realize, like, okay, so people know now. But yeah, you needed that. You needed that kind of education. And because it was an entirely new form. I mean, it's a new incentive structure as a way to generate, a kind of action. But that, even though it required that kind of education, like people were willing to do it from the beginning because it was exciting and because, to support someone that you cared about directly, it seemed like, isn't this what like the internet's supposed to be about? So I think it fulfilled a lot of the goals and dreams of the web. And I sort of think of it as it just put a door in a wall where no one knew a door needed to be, but once it was there, it was just so obvious. Just like, of course you need a way for just like the fans and the artists to directly collaborate to make things. And, of course you want the safety of like an artist being stuck with a underfunded project, but fans expecting it anyway. So like, it really creates and provides value.
Yeah. Yancey, in the early days, what was your role? And did you end up quitting your other job and going full speed into Kickstarter?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say at the beginning I was like community. I was talking to artists and creative people. I was doing copy. I was like, Perry and I working on telling the story and just kind of like what is this that we're making here? And then when we launched, I was responding to every customer service email. I was interfacing with every creator. I was interviewing every creator before they launched their project to like make sure it met our guidelines. I was sort of screening those things, and then started building out the team. And I still had my day job for the first 3 months. I would say we were live, maybe 2 months, and I was just like doing the CS work, like after work. And then that just became not tenable. And we could see like the site was having, it wasn't like a hockey stick start, but the site was having enough success that we thought we were going to be able to raise money and actually like have salaries probably by the end of the year. So it was in like July that I made the leap, but I was afraid to.
Yeah, I mean, talk to us about that, because I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs are in that position of like almost broke. Like at any given moment, like they can be at that $0 or an even negative mark, and we always talk about it. That moment that mindset isn't very conducive to being an entrepreneur, because at the end of the day, you want to survive, right? Like, sure, money is important and it's not everything, but you need it to keep going.
There's a little bit of craziness that entrepreneurs have, that like you're on the brink of going broke, but you're still pushing forward and you still want to.
Well, just because you just reach these points of you're just so far in. Like it's the path out is to keep going. Like there isn't another path, and there isn't another path. Maybe for practical reasons, but might also just because of like shame. Just like, after getting this far, am I really going to be the one who almost climbed the mountain? Like, no. So I think those things they motivate you. You need that kind of conflict to push you. So yeah, but the choice to leave, honestly, it feels like to quit. Yeah, to quit my job. Yeah, I mean, it feels like so long ago. I just remember like I just didn't have a lot of savings, and had only recently started making like more than $50,000 a year for the first time, and
you're living in New York, which is
I'm living in New York, and so I just have, I've always had a scarcity mindset when it comes to money, and so yeah, even though I believed in what we were doing, like there was just like this deeper fear that would override that belief until a certain point where the site was live, people were using it, and and it had reached the point where there was enough validation for it to no longer be a dumb risk. And if I'd had a little bit of savings, or if I'd had some other side form of income, I certainly would have done it earlier. But a lot of it was just my own personal narrative about feelings, about what it meant to feel secure, to be secure.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned like it wasn't a hockey stick growth situation, but was there like a moment, maybe like when a huge project was funded or something, where you were like, this is going to be huge?
I mean, it was just seeing the gradual, it was just like, just seeing the size of the projects getting bigger. The first time a project broke 10 grand was a big deal. Just seeing it, like, it just kept working at larger scales. I mean, the moment where it like breakthrough into mass consciousness in the biggest way was February 9th, 2012, when 2 projects crossed $1 million in funding for the first time.
Wow.
And one of those projects had launched the night before, Double Fine Adventure, this video game project.
Wow.
And so, within less than 24 hours, it was going to raise $1 million. The whole internet was like following along. We were all in the office watching on a projector. You would refresh the site and it would take like 2 minutes for it to load again. But it was this moment where Kickstarter was just like this great white knight of the internet. We were like the people's lottery ticket. Like a normal person or a overlooked legend could put up a new idea and overnight seemingly be a millionaire. And that brought huge amounts of attention, and then brought, creators who wanted some of that money too. Mm-hmm. And so then I think we started to see a culture shift in the sort of people who are interested in using the site, that instead of it being, or in addition to it being like the modern dance troupe or the musicians or artists that we had worked with them before, now it was people doing startups and people launching products. And so that just led to projects suddenly raising millions of dollars regularly. And in the midst of this, we ended up later that year announcing a set of rules kind of out of nowhere called Kickstarter is Not a Store, that banned photorealistic renderings, banned like product simulations, banned forced projects to show their workable prototype, and just said, we get that like the language of marketing and advertising is of like just selling and promising the world, but like we want this to be a different kind of place. And so that was just like stepping out in front of a giant money train and just saying, slow down. Like you got to hold this up.
At some point, I'm assuming like the company starts growing and you're hiring more people. And I know you at some point started serving as the CEO. When did that happen? And what were those early were there any challenges for you, like being in that role?
It was at the end of 2013 that Perry stepped up to become chairman. Charles left the company, and then I stepped into the CEO role. And so that was, I think that was just sort of like, it felt like a natural moment of transition. Things were going well. Things were in a solid place. We're about to move into a new office. We had bought this abandoned pencil factory in Brooklyn and renovated it. So my first day as CEO was basically our first day in this new office, which was crazy because the company was about 60 people then, and we took up like one tiny corner of one of the 3 floors of the building. Like really, it was just like, whoa, what's supposed to happen here? So it was a real like inflection point for the company of moving into this new space. Really, the company starting to professionalize and becoming more of an organization, and really growing in a lot of different ways. And so that that was like, it was challenging. I mean, Perry and Charles and I had always had a good working relationship together, and Perry and I had always been very close and making lots of decisions together. And, but like feeling the weight of that just on my own shoulders was heavier than I thought it was going to be. Just like the emotional weight of it. And, but so it was like being in that role was like brought out the best of me, also like challenged the weakest parts of me. And I had, I think, many great moments in that role. I think I had, moments that were really, really hard on me that, I think, I don't know. It's just amazing how a job like that sort of exacerbates everything that's inside of you.
How many years did you do that?
I was CEO for almost 4 years. And yeah, it was like just a lot of growth, a lot of my memory is like recruiting executives, recruiting leaders to the company. And just like what a long and intense process it is to hire senior people, like maybe 4 months on average, and that's probably a success year. It's like 4 months. And so that's like, maybe for me as a CEO, if it's like someone that's reporting to me, that's maybe like 18 first date dinners with potential candidates, maybe 10 second dinners, and all this triangulation of the rest of the team, and running this process where you're simultaneously trying to suss out whether someone would be right for the job while also making sure that they want the job no matter what you think. And so that, like, so much of my energy, I feel like, was about that.
Right.
And then just like communicating and recommunicating the goals and the objectives of the company to the team, knowing where to go, is a lot easier than like staying connected to where to go and staying on point with it. And, so there's just like a lot of the ways in which the job would stay very similar, like and the other probably one of the biggest things that happened while I was CEO is the company made the conversion to become a PBC. And so this is where we rewrote our corporate charter to say that to make Kickstarter a public benefit corporation and to bind the company to these 15 or so commitments that include things like not using legal but esoteric tax avoidance strategies to avoid paying our taxes, and various ways to try to demonstrate, to just try to hold the company accountable, and not have it be that like, it's just good people run that company, so you can trust them. Well, you can only trust them as long as those people are in charge. So how do you make those things durable and lasting?
Right.
And so really, like my last couple of years as CEO, I think it's a lot of like bringing in those leaders and a lot of that kind of meta structure work of like advocating for being a PBC, trying to be clear why we thought this was an important change to make, like why a company like Kickstarter being bound to a profit maximizing mindset is a bad thing for everyone in the long run, and just the need for this kind of transition. I
think it was like around 2017 when you decided to leave.
Yeah.
What sort of prompted that?
Well, I mean, I think it had really probably started like over a year before. I'd hired a couple senior leaders to the company, and that didn't work out. One was just a different situation. And that at the end of 2016, in my 360 review, where every year I would get a 40 or 50 page document of anonymous comments like about the job you're doing, and there's a lot of people saying that things have felt more unsteady that year than they'd ever really felt before, and sort of like pointing to these changes and other challenges that were related to me. And I was surprised and concerned when I read this. I mean, in my mind, these were things that had happened in the past, right. But I could see that people were still feeling them. And so then, I ended up starting a conversation with the board that I was a part of, and just said, hey, like, here's this 360. Me as a CEO says, here's why it says this. Here's why everything's cool. Me as a co-founder says, hey, if we have a CEO that's getting a review that says things are unsteady, I feel like we have to ask questions. And these are the kinds of questions that, we should probably be asking. And so that, just try to lean into it. And through the course of that, decided to go. And there was a sort of a moment where I reached a kind of a breaking point. Having a lot of conversations with the board and with Perry, and then had a day where I was going to work, and I just remember I was at my front door, and I couldn't lift my arm to open the door, and my wife found me there a couple minutes later and was like, "What's going on?" And I just said, I just can't be that person today. I just felt all these things that I was sort of carrying, sort of representing the company internally, representing the company to the world, bringing in these people, knowing that I'm having these larger conversations, not knowing how I felt, all that stuff. And I could just, it was just heavy. And so it was maybe 4 or 5 months after that, that, told the company that I was stepping down, that Perry would step in on an interim basis. And, and I made the choice in that I also just wanted to just move forward completely.
Yeah. What did you want to do?
Well, what's that?
What did you want to do? Because we can sort of talk about what you've done since then.
Yeah,
but, you've sort of gone back to writing, and you've written a book. And so is that what your sort of vision was? You wanted to go back to that creative space of just writing and doing what you originally loved?
I think all I knew at that point was that I just wanted to think about something else. I felt like I've been thinking about the same problems for 12 years, right? And a lot of them are ones that don't have an answer, which is why you keep thinking about them. And I honestly, I just thought, I don't want to think about these things anymore. And so, but my behavior already showed me that, my talks were all about the macro ideas of the meta structure of Kickstarter versus the product itself. That was what was more personally interesting to me. So I just started digging in that direction. And I've been giving talks sort of about the larger context that Kickstarter was within. And turned that made the choice to turn those ideas into a book, and to make an argument that I wanted to make an argument that our world had been really reduced to a very limited notion of value, and that form of value is just whatever option makes the most money. That's the right decision. And the world of creativity before Kickstarter is an example of that. Your project sounds great as long as we'll make money on it. That is the litmus test for existence. And to say that was, we convinced ourselves that was rational and how things should be, but that I wanted to argue that the spectrum of valid, rational reasons to do something was far wider than that. And the spectrum of what is valuable and what value is larger than that. And I wanted to make a socioeconomic, historical, personal experience argument, a manifesto that makes this case, and tries to do so in a way that I'm trying to poke what I think are the deepest assumptions, because the things I've read and the things I think about make me believe that if you poke the deepest assumptions in the right ways, that things will change.
Was it challenging to kind of transition from this daily life of running this massive business to writing a book?
At first, yeah. I mean, I think the first week, I rented on Craigslist. I found some studio apartment in Chinatown where I would go and write every day with no internet.
Moved, right? So you moved from New York.
That was late. Yeah, I did. Midway
LA?
Through the process, I moved from New York to LA.
Yeah.
But I was still in New York when I started.
Got it.
But I remember, so I was in this apartment that had no internet, and I just had books I was reading and just Post-its on the walls. It was my second or third day doing it, and I was just feeling kind of pissed off all day. And I could recognize the kind of pissed off I was feeling was the way I would feel on my worst days as a CEO. And when I would feel that way as a CEO, I I had a long list of circumstances I could blame. It's their fault. It's because it's this kind of day. It's because this is always screwed up, whatever. And I'm having all those same feelings, but yet, like, I'm the only one there. There's not even any internet. Like, but yet I'm in this,
right.
I'm realizing I'm in like a cycle that is me. And so to have to confront that was pretty wild because it made me realize, this is only like day 2, and I'm already
right. Like it has nothing to do with the CEO role. It's personal. It's
personal, and also it's like I'm already sort of hitting the limits of my like comfortable depth on day 2. Right, I'm having these feelings because I'm reaching the limits of where I feel discomfort, and like so how much farther am I going to have to go?
Yeah.
And so I ended up stepping into that. I ended up growing a mustache as a way to force myself to get over that. And in truth,
way to do it.
But yeah, I've came to find the experience to be very natural. I mean, I think I had real moments of misery, but also really enjoyed it, and I am good at it. I was good at it. But really I had to like shut down the rest of my life and just sort of devote myself to exploring and explaining an idea for the course of about 16 months. And after like being inside an organization for 10 years, like to be isolated working on a deeper thing for 16 months, I mean, you couldn't ask for something better.
Yeah.
Why'd you move to LA?
Once I wasn't doing Kickstarter full time anymore, it just sort of felt like I had my New York chapters of Music Critic and then Kickstarter, and I don't know, like the idea of starting a third chapter there again was less exciting than just starting something all over again. We just tried out here for a month, just to like put all of our things in storage. We're just like, let's figure out what we're gonna do, and then this just felt right.
Yeah.
And there's like some of the like the critical theory philosophy books I read in college were weirdly written here. like Gramsci and Adorno, like these like, Frankfurt School neo-Marxists, like they came to LA to flee the Nazis. And so like there's weirdly a large number of important philosophical books that were written in Los Angeles, which I'd always just like struck me.
I didn't know that.
So I'd found this idea of like that maybe this would be a good place to disappear.
Right.
Yeah.
And it is very good at that.
And so the book is called "This Could Be Our Future."
Yeah.
And you can find it on Amazon.
Yeah, you can find it everywhere. It's basically it's it's doing great. I mean, it's got I think 4 or 5 stars on Amazon and Goodreads.
Nice.
And I've been doing talks all over about it. But yeah, the first half of the book makes this argument about how our world became overtaken by this financial notion of value, how that sort of reduced a lot of our world and is behind a lot of the problems that seem unsolvable to us now. And then the second half of the book, I introduce a new framework called Bentoism, but it's just basically a different way of seeing self-interest and a different way of seeing like the spaces in which we operate.
Sort of like to compartmentalize.
So it's saying, so it's saying that like, we think of like a hockey stick as like the ultimate success scenario,
right?
But like that spot is just like the bottom left corner of a much larger universe of self-interest. Like in the bento, there's 4 spaces to think about. There's now me, what I want and need right now. This is the world where probably we 90% operate today. But there's also future me, the bottom right corner of this bento, which is the older, wiser version of yourself, like the salt and pepper version that still has the bod, still has the mind and made all the right choices. So like you're living up to that person. There's also in the top left of the bento, now us, the people we rely on and who rely on us. And then the top right is future us, your kids or everybody else's kids. And so the idea is that every choice we make has a footprint in all these spaces, now me, now us, future us. But today we're functionally blind to almost everything outside of now me. We don't see it as very real. It's like less rational. Those are more emotional spaces. Right. But like our inability to create value or to see the value in those spaces is exactly what has us so screwed. The bento is just it's a very simple tool and framework that builds in a muscle memory to think not just about today, to think not just about yourself, but also it's a framework for an organization to see like where it's having its impact, where there's opportunity for value to be made for you to demonstrate something to your customers, and so just like to me the bento is an expression. I'm sure there will be many more expressions of this, but trying to really show how it is that we operate in modern life. We think we're moving around all these like trapped interrogation booths and like we don't interact with each other, but there's a much larger universe that we really struggle to perceive. And so there's a site, bentoism.org, that teaches people this. I've taught about workshops to this for about 700 people or so. Teaches you your values, teaches you tools to making self-coherent choices. And it's basically the end goal is about living in integrity with who you are. Knowing who you are and then knowing how to consistently make choices honoring that, which is like the whole game and not easy to do.
Do you see yourself writing more books and really exercising more of that creative muscle, or do you see yourself down the line starting another business? Have you had time to even think about it yet? I know you're like almost 2.5, 3 years removed from Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Have you had time to put in that sort of thought?
Yeah, I think about those things for sure. I think I'm a creative person, and so I'm going to keep telling stories and pulling on the things that are interesting to me. But what is true is that by being in the chair, by being a CEO, by having that experience, I really do see the world from that way, and so I'm a lot more collaborative and than I used to be, and able to bring people together on these projects. And I've learned, when you get a group of people working together on something, how powerful that can be. So I'm certainly open to the momentum of ideas generating the need for organization and more structure. That's something I've been toying with a fair amount recently. But in the same way it is with Kickstarter, like it's going to be because an idea is deserving of it, in my opinion, and not out of a desire to do that on its own.
Got it.
Well, this has been so great, and thank you so much for walking us through that whole story. And I wish we had more time to talk more about like Bentoism and what you're doing there. But hopefully, we can do this again sometime. In the future, and hopefully that could be our future. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Yancey.
All right, thanks, guys.